For the Detroit Free Press, it's Tuesday, September 1st. Here are today's top stories, presented by Bush's Fresh Food Market. Bush's has over 4,000 Michigan products, including the freshest fruit and vegetables, meat, seafood, and baked goods. Stop by one of Bush's 16 locations for the personal service you expect from your neighborhood grocer. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Tad Davis. On Friday, May 9th, 4 days after the killing of George Floyd, the beginning of almost 100 days of protests began in the city of Detroit. The protests have had lulls as well as escalations from both police and protesters.
My name is M.L. Elric. I'm a reporter at the Detroit Free Press.
M.L. Elric has been on the ground following these protests. I spoke with him about a new lawsuit against the city of Detroit from a group of protesters called Detroit Will Breathe after a recent clash between the two groups. Here's M.L.
A recent weekend, August 22nd, August 23rd, members of the Detroit Will Breathe group decided that they would occupy a section of Woodward Avenue in the heart of downtown, closing it off to traffic, posting on their website that they would hold the ground until federal agents who had been sent here recently went home, and police, after issuing some warnings that they needed to go home, surged into the crowd, made 44 arrests, and in this case, some very stark images emerged of police, it looks like fairly roughly handling protesters, including spraying some in the face and possibly striking them with batons, certainly making contact with riot shields. Basically, the protesters aren't following the law. You're not allowed to march down the middle of city streets without permits. If police provide you escorts, you need to pay them. But there's been a compromise where the police and the city have decided if you continue to move forward and you continue to operate in a peaceful manner, there's certain laws we just won't enforce. But if you stop and you decide to dig in your heels, we're probably going to move you on.
And now the more recent news is Detroit Will Breathe is suing the city of Detroit. What does this new lawsuit entail?
There have been lawyers working with the National Lawyers Guild who have been collecting essentially testimony and preparing for a moment like this. The lawyers went to some of the demonstrations and collected affidavits. And on Monday, they filed a lawsuit against the city of Detroit, the chief of police, the mayor of Detroit, saying that police are basically using violent tactics, brutal tactics, they say, in an attempt to silence protesters. And they've asked a federal judge to issue a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction that would prevent police from using the very tactics that they have exhibited over the past 3 months. Essentially, donning riot gear, using tear gas to try and disperse crowds, using loud noises to disorient protesters, to encourage them to go home, and laying hands on protesters. And the city has said that this is all a bunch of baloney, but they are welcoming the lawsuit because they say, finally, we can go into a court of law where facts are going to be the order of the day and refute these baseless allegations. Now, of course, they're not all baseless because the city itself and the prosecutor brought charges against the Detroit police officer, but the chief of police and city officials have said, listen, protesters have attacked us too. They've thrown objects at us, they've thrown fireworks at us, they've damaged police cars, and they've injured police officers. So we're looking at now what could be a fairly pitched legal battle over the very fundamental issue of whether or not people are allowed to assemble and demonstrate in Detroit streets without being moved along by police. And police say, all we're trying to do is enforce the law. When we tell you have to move, when we tell you there's a curfew and you disobey a lawful order and you fail to go when we tell you to go, then we're going to have to come and get you.
To read more of M.L. Elric's work and news about the protests, head to freep.com.
This is Brendel Hightower for the Detroit Free Press. On a sunny day in the middle of a city besieged by a relentless virus, 1,500 Metro Detroiters were memorialized in a massive ceremony like no other in the country. During the memorial drive, the faces of those lost to COVID-19 were on full display for miles along Belle Isle Park. Oversized portraits of 907 people who died from the virus were staked in the ground as their loved ones drove past to bid a collective farewell. The memorial saw thousands of cars processing through Belle Isle, which was closed to the public. The public is invited to view the memorial display on the island Tuesday and Wednesday.
This is Evan Petzold of the Free Press Sports Department. Even amid the most uncertain trade deadline in MLB history, the Detroit Tigers decided to make a last-minute move. Outfielder Cameron Maybin was traded to the Chicago Cubs just as the 4 p.m. deadline ceased Monday. The Tigers received infielder Zach Short in return, and he will join the reserve squad at the alternate training site in Toledo. The Tigers have now traded Maybin 3 times in his 14-year MLB career. In 2007 to the Florida Marlins in a package for Miguel Cabrera, in 2016 to the Los Angeles Angels for Victor Alcantara, and now again in 2020. General manager Al Avila decided to keep second baseman Jonathan Scope and catcher Austin Romine, 2 players on 1-year contracts like Maybin. They have been key pieces to the success in the shortened 60-game season, with Scope hitting 8 home runs and 19 RBIs, as well as having Romine around to help with the development of young prospects. With the Tigers owning a 16-16 overall record, and the price not being exactly right for deals with Scope and Romine, Avila decided to take an interesting stand at this year's trade deadline: win and rebuild, all at the same time.
For more stories from the Detroit Free Press, be sure to check out freep.com. That's FREEP.com. If you're a fan and want to support our quality local journalism, subscribe. Go to freep.com/special offer.